The other week, I went with a couple of friends here in Portland to go hear Timothy Snyder speak. He was talking about his new book on freedom. I know a lot of folks are really familiar with his book on tyranny. It got pumped really heavily on social media before the election. But his new book on freedom, y'all, don't be content to read on tyranny and just stop there. Pick this up right after. This was so good. You know when a book is so good because you are thinking about it when you are filling up your gas tank, when you're in line at the grocery store. You lay awake in bed at night and you're thinking about something from this book. I'm doing dishes and I'm thinking about things he said in the chapter on solidarity. But when we went to go hear Tim speak, one of my friends that I went with, he was talking about how the chapter that really stuck with him and he was really mulling over was the one on unpredictability. I was like, I might have plowed through that a little too quickly because, well, it struck me, it wasn't like the chapter on solidarity. And then we got in there and we heard Snyder speak and he talked about unpredictability, how the future is not yet written. And I was like, I gotta reread this chapter. And so I did this past week. And several people asked me to speak about it a little bit. Snyder, I think, has been really shaped and inspired by the Velvet Revolution and Václav Havel, president of the Czech Republic, former president of the Czech Republic. He speaks extensively about him in the book and also in other works of his. That's a period in history I find really fascinating and I think is yet another example of one of these revolutionary movements that we really should spend some time investing in. So in this chapter on unpredictability, Snyder talks quite a bit about Havel and the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, and their move toward becoming the Czech Republic. And he talks about the importance of unpredictability, not just the idea that the future is not yet known and, what happens next is entirely unpredictable in so many ways, but also the fact that we need to be unpredictable, that when we are predictable, that we are much more easy to control. He says we are being tamed by the machine, dulled to one another. When we are conditioned to behave in a predictable way, social norms, expectations, when those are laid upon us, it makes us much more easy to control. When we are unpredictable, we open ourselves up to the possibility of what can happen. And it's far harder for those who want unfreedom to be able to restrain our efforts to secure freedom and to continue to defend it. So how do we cultivate this attitude of unpredictability? How do we cultivate unpredictability in our pro-democracy movement? Let me read just a little bit here from this chapter. Our thinkers can help us resist predictability. Stein argued that bodily empathy leads us toward reasonability. Simone Weil made the case that our corporeality allows us to ask the important questions. Kolakowski said that human existence is about pushing beyond the edge of a predictable world into one that is not. Havel warned us that we can be tempted into thinking like machines or even into thinking that we are machines. All of them insisted on the why and the search for the world of values. As we engage with the digital world, we grow comfortable with the how questions, the inhuman ones, and we find awkward the why questions, the human ones involving judgments about good and evil. We phrase how questions in terms of efficiency, maximization, and optimization. The idiom of productivity is senseless in itself. It can be meaningful only when we know what we value. No notion of means ends rationality. If you value A, you should value B, coheres without a value judgment. No amount of how can get you to why. The how questions generate quantitative propositions that computer programs can handle. As we translate the experience of life into machine language, we risk our minds becoming something like satellite servers to make things easier for the computers, which do not and cannot care. When we confuse the convenient with the significant, the death principle descends like a cold fog. A major political challenge in this century is to get out from under the legacy of empire, a theme of his next chapter, by the way. And yet, we seem to be building a new sort of empire instead. Frantz Fanon, the psychiatrist and anti-colonial thinker, observed that empire transforms humans from why creatures into how creatures. A colonizer portrays other colonizers as having agency, and colonized people as without agency, and therefore as instruments. As we lose our sense of why, we are being colonized by our machines. with the vertiginous twist that our mechanical colonizers have no agency. We are submitting to an entity that cannot enjoy its domination. Simone Weil predicted that capitalism will be succeeded by oppression exercised in the name of function. Sound like America? In surveillance capitalism, as Shoshana Zuboff rightly calls it, rationality means constant monitoring so that an invisibly tiny group of people can profit. There, meaning the super wealthy, empire is not visible in territory like empires of old, and they usually stash their wealth in tax shelters rather than flaunting it in marble palaces. Donald Trump loves that marble gilded palace, though. The digital oligarchs themselves have no idea what they are doing, aside from indulging in some vague competition with one another. They monopolize everyone's future and fill it with inbred silliness. When we forget the why and only have the how, our imagination seeps into the gully of the status quo. We rationalize using our residual intelligence to explain that the world cannot be otherwise than it is, and that we cannot do otherwise than we have done, right? Believing that things cannot be otherwise than they are, believing that everything is predictable. That is how we collaborate with our own unfreedom. Taking responsibility for past decisions is necessary for constructing future freedom. If we rationalize the past, we are trapped in a story, a narrative of what must be that others will use against us. Our digital nemesis and its human acolytes train us to be rational, in just that sense of rationalization, of making excuses for the very process that is humiliating us. We are to accept the world as elites and the machines have given it to us, and we are to praise our ascribed place. Such self-subjugation is a return to a feudal world in which a divine order has been replaced by a digital one sort of priest by another. This is not enlightenment, but darkness. Weil warned that the how of life can crowd out the why, that utility becomes something which the intelligence is no longer entitled to define or to judge, but only to serve. When humans call on other humans to turn their minds into rationalization circuits, the gist is that we should be functional, like machines. We should sacrifice the capacities that make us different from computers and instead become poor imitations of them. Rather than seeking freedom by thinking reasonably with facts and values, we fade into the status quo. We should not call into question the parameters of our existence, but simply make best of what we are given. Freedom is positive. It needs the vivifying world of values. If we have no purpose, we serve someone else's, or we serve a purposeless machine. We have been assigned a senseless task to adjust, to adapt, to normalize, to internalize the death principle before we die, to regard ourselves not as lieb, but as corpor, to consider ourselves as nothing better than a computer simulation, to die without having lived, to self-zombify. A human intelligence that asks why before it asks how, that is directed toward freedom rather than utility. It is not rational so much as reasonable. It does not waste energy rationalizing the existent state of affairs or its own weakness. It reasons instead with the help of values and others toward better futures. It operates in the borderlands of unpredictability, considering values and facts. It seeks to understand the world as it is and to bend it toward the way it should be. I find it interesting how Tim says that unpredictability and reasonableness go hand in hand. He says, "It is hard to be free alone, sovereign alone, unpredictable alone. If I ever became reasonable, it was thanks to the people around me, neighboring sources of human intelligence. When I was with my teacher, Kolakowski, or even when I read his books today, I have a sense that I am in contact with the border of the unpredictable. Free people who push up against that border are expanding the fifth dimension, the realm of virtues." Okay, I'm going to leave it there, but this whole concept of being unpredictable and how that helps move us from unfreedom into freedom, I cannot stop thinking about it, so I'll probably be talking about it more later this week. In the meantime, if you have not read Tim Snyder's book on freedom, do yourself a favor and read it. If you're in East Portland and you want to borrow my copy, give me a holler.